Julian, welcome.
Hello.
Nice to be here. Now, we have to be very careful today because you and I could probably talk for about 6 hours and do a bottle of wine over most of this, so we just need to be a bit sensitive. Thanks for joining us. I know we've got quite a few people on the line today. What's the format? Let's discuss, if we can, the format. Really want to just talk through almost proposition by proposition what the ALP took to the election in relation to sort of the workplace space. Talk a little bit about what it was, probably our views on it.
Some of them.
Some of our
moderated
views, and probably a little bit of early insight and some things for most of you to start thinking about and in some cases actually doing. We will, of course, kick off by talking about the composition of the Parliament, and because everybody keeps saying to me, yeah, that's great, but will they get it through?
Can they do it?
Can they do it? So we should start there probably. Just want to reflect a little bit on what the union movement was advocating for, well, before the election was even called. And then we'll come to questions, and we got inundated with pre-poll questions. Can we use that phrase? Pre-poll questions?
Yeah, it was an avalanche.
It was an avalanche of questions. So we've actually selected a few, but as always, please send your questions through. Jules has got the device, and if we can get to some questions on the run, we will. Now, I don't know if everybody's a sort of an avid follower of this, but I'm glued to the ABC all the way through election night. I think proposition number one is the House of Reps. They'll get everything they want through the House of Reps. They've got a ALP majority in the lower house. I understand that all of the others, and I live on the Northern Beaches, so I'm now part of the teal world that we all live in. It's very clear, though, that in terms of the lower house, there's no issue. They'll be able to get through what they want. The real challenge is going to be in the Senate. And the bottom line in the Senate is that if Labor want to fundamentally change workplace laws in this country, they're either going to need the Liberal Party to help them, or they're going to need the Greens.
Yes.
Ironically, I suspect there's some things in their package the Liberal Party would support. The Respect at Work recommendations, which I'll get you to talk about more than me later on, I think the Liberal Party would support those. But I think the majority of things that the ALP want to do, the Liberal Party won't. So there's going to be a question about the Greens. Now, I don't know if you're a Green voter because you're younger than me, so I'll be very careful how I say this. The Greens' workplace agenda, as I read it, is more left than the Labor Party's. I'm not going to describe it as anti-business, but it certainly is less pro-business than the ALP, and it's even, of course, less pro-business than the Liberal Coalition Party.
I think that's fair.
I suspect the answer goes something like this. The ALP will probably get Green support for most of its changes in workplace relations. The $64,000 question is whether or not the Greens want something for that and whether or not the ALP are prepared to pay the price.
Yes.
And, of course, those things might be more around climate, energy policy and things like that. So on paper, it kind of looks like the Labor Party have got pretty easy passage to change workplace laws in Australia. But as we've often seen, once you get into negotiations in the Senate, anything can kind of happen. But I don't really see a big role to play for One Nation or Jackie Lambie, or being an ex-rugby player yourself, David Pocock in the ACT, who looks like he's going to get the ticket for the ACT.
He does.
Do you think that's a reasonable way of describing?
I think it is. I mean, everything is open water at the moment.
Open water.
There were no problems on the horizons. The Labor Party's got the lower house. The Greens will help the Labor Party get through the upper house. Obviously, things are going to happen in the next few years. The economy may change. Conditions may change. And so it's the trade-offs between the Greens, which is really interesting, whether the Labor Party has the stomach for those trade-offs. But assuming they do, I mean, I think the principles should be around the same, should be relevant.
They believe in the same things when it comes to workplace relations.
Absolutely.
They really do.
Absolutely.
And look, we've been asked so much over the last week, how fast? And it's almost gossip at the moment about how fast. I've got friends in the Labor movement at the moment who are telling me there possibly could be a new Fair Work Act itself early in 2023. And I've also got friends in the Labor movement who are telling me that they want to bring some piecemeal amendment legislation in much earlier than that around certain key areas. So we're just going to have to wait and see, but I don't think this is something they're going to be looking at in 2 years' time. I think this is part of their first 12-month agenda. There's going to be workplace relations reform attempted in this country, and I suspect some of it could be quite material. So
you'd expect that. The government's changed after a long period of coalition government. I think it's different from 2019, where the scuttlebutt was that there's a new Fair Work Act in the drawer that they're going to dump on the table.
Which there was
on the first day. A smaller target this election. The Labor Party's gone to the polls with some stuff. Of course, they're going to have stuff which we'll talk about today. But I think we'll probably see it incrementally change over time. But you wouldn't be thinking it's going to be business as usual from here.
Not at all. And I thought the best place to start was the summit.
The summit.
Because if you read the papers on the weekend, you'll find that almost Hawke-esque, almost Keating-esque, the new Prime Minister said we were going to have an employment summit. I think it's described as the Australian Jobs Summit.
Yes.
The Full Employment Summit, which seems somewhat ironic given that we're probably going to have employment at 3 point something. The idea that we need a summit to talk about full employment or jobs. I suspect that the truth of the matter is that this summit is predominantly going to be talking about industrial relations issues, particularly around the bargaining space. And I think we can expect an attempt to quite dramatically reform bargaining in this country. And I'm just going to throw on the table my views of that at the moment, and we can see whether or not you come with me. I think we will see a number of smaller scale but meaningful changes, and then we might have a big change. What do I mean by that? I think we're going to see laws prohibiting small cohort agreements.
Yes.
These are the agreements where somebody is going to end up with 200 employees, but they make an agreement with the first 4.
They're called spearhead agreements.
Spearhead agreements.
Spearhead agreements.
I wasn't aware of that. Is that a new one or?
It's actually my phrase.
It's your phrase?
Yes.
Okay. I think they're going to go. I suspect that there's going to be changes to the ability to apply to terminate enterprise agreements. I think generally speaking,
relatively young enterprise agreements.
Relatively young enterprise agreements.
Your old zombie agreements.
Your old zombie agreements.
You may not even have the ability to terminate. They just might be gone.
Be dissolved.
Yep, exactly.
Dissolved. But the labour movement generally has been very unhappy with employers being in ongoing bargaining disputes, and the thermonuclear device is an application to terminate. Very rarely do those applications run their course, but that thermonuclear device is so challenging that more often than not you cut a deal.
Yep.
I have a feeling that the ability to do that sort of thing is going to be dramatically watered down from the employer's perspective. So I think that's on the cards. I wouldn't be surprised if we find it easier, less administratively burdensome for people to take protected industrial action. And I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes easier to compel employers who don't want to bargain to bargain. So around what I call the small items, even though for some people they'll be very meaningful, I think we'll see those changes. And I think the big ticket change, and we just saw that in New Zealand 4 or 5 months ago,
yep.
I think there is clearly going to be a very strong push for some form of industry-based bargaining. What the rules of that are going to be, I honestly wouldn't even want to speculate at the moment.
Who the players are.
Which industries it might apply to, whether or not it applies at large. Some industries will tell you straight away that's going to be a disaster. I suspect there'll be economists saying it's going to be a macroeconomic disaster. But we know for a fact that we look after some industries who might be open-minded about that, particularly, say, in the funded sectors.
Yes.
Possibly things like childcare might have an open mind about that. I'm not necessarily saying they endorse it, but they might have a more open mind to explore it to begin with. But I think that's certainly on the horizon coming through. And when I look at what I'm telling clients at the moment, strangely, it sounds awfully like what I told clients when Work Choices came in. If you're negotiating right now, hurry up, get yourself sorted out, get it done. I'm telling most clients if they can try and get a 4-year agreement, because what does a 4-year agreement guarantee you? It jumps you over the first term of this government.
Yep.
And it will allow you to sit back and watch everything that's going to happen and play out, and you'll be a smart and considered follower rather than somebody first cab off the rank if the laws do change. And for some people, start that conversation now about what might our policy view be in response to industry bargaining if it is tabled as part of a reform agenda through the Employment Summit.
Has to be said, Nigel, I mean, enterprise bargaining is not in rude health as a concept.
Well, I understand we had a technical glitch there. First time in a great many years, but we'll press on. And hopefully if we're struggling to get to you right now, we'll be sending you the recording anyway. Bargaining's not in rude health, I think the comment was, Jules.
Yeah, feed dropped and bargaining has dropped as well. Something needs to be done in terms of bargaining if you're the Labor Party. We've spoken about some of those things, whether that'll kick it off, whether that'll pump its heart so it rises again, we'll have to see.
Well, watch this space because it'll be interesting to see who goes to the Employment Summit. I suspect the usual suspects will go. I think the Business Council's already talking about it. Clearly the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and people like that will be going.
Am I a pessimist to think that bargaining isn't going to get better for employers?
Yeah, I think that would be a reasonable way of putting it. I mean, it's going to become, I suspect it'll become harder for employers to achieve what they want in bargaining, either culturally or in terms of regulation flexibility. Because those two things are very, very important to consider, as we always discuss when we talk about bargaining. It's as much a cultural exercise as it is an industrial exercise. Equal pay, better deal for women. I think this essentially falls into three parts. There's the respect at work reforms.
Yes.
There's the decision in the domestic violence leave case and the invitation from the Fair Work Commission, will the government put this into the national employment standards? And then there's proposed changes to the equal pay rules. Respect at work report, 55 recommendations. Done deal?
Well, there were 4 in play. So out of the 55, there were 4 in play at the election. The Labor Party has now won the election. Those 4 recommendations will be implemented. In summary form, the big ticket one is the positive duty on employers to take appropriate steps, proportionate steps to eliminate sexual discrimination, sexual victimisation, sexual harassment in the workplace. The easiest way of thinking about this is as a safety issue, which it is. Work Health and Safety Act has a positive duty on employers to ensure the safety of workers in a workplace. In the same way, the Sex Discrimination Act will have a positive duty on employers to prevent sexual discrimination, harassment, victimisation, and so forth. The other 3 recommendations are more about how the tribunal will work, or the commission will work. There'll be a change to let unions and representative groups bring claims, which might increase claims and might increase access to justice for people who bring those claims. There will be powers for investigations to see if people are complying with their positive duty. And there will be a cost change. So a bit like in the Fair Work world, which we live in, costs are generally not a thing in legal proceedings in the same way that they are in other commercial areas of law. That will be a change that will be brought in. So there will be more action in that space. We might talk about the insight there. This is really about reinvesting in training. Reinvesting.
Tamsin Lawrence, who's going to head up our Melbourne office that we're opening up very shortly, she did some excellent training with some of our clients, I think last month. She's got another training course, I think next month. Have a look at that. She's just top of the game in this area. And it was interesting, most of the conversation was around how do I get my house in order in terms of this positive duty? What more should I be doing inside my business, be it a small business or a large business?
And as Tamsin would say, you have to do something. You're going to have to do something. Yeah. It's not enough to just say, oh, well, I hope nothing happens. You're going to have to do something. So that's a change that will be coming forward. Domestic violence leave, the Commission has just finished the review of domestic violence leave in modern awards. The result of that review was a decision to introduce, at a principal level at least, 10 days paid domestic violence leave into all modern awards. What was very important about that decision was that it left open, before it's implemented, the government to say what it might do. The Commission are very, very concerned that, like 5 years ago, it will change all modern awards only for the government to change the NES, and therefore rendering all of those changes to modern awards redundant. I think it's likely that the Labor Party will.
I think they will. I think they will, and I don't think there'll be any. I think the Liberal Party will support it, frankly, in the end.
But what I was going to say is, significantly, the Fair Work Commission's decision in the domestic violence leave review didn't extend 10 days paid leave to everyone. They only extended paid leave to people who have paid leave, that is permanent employees, full-time, part-time employees, not to casuals. So I think that will be the interesting question for the Labor Party.
We'll be in the detail.
Exactly.
We'll be in detail. And look, we don't have all the time we need to talk about equal pay. We've been involved in all of the equal pay cases that have been run since the Fair Work Act started. I must say I'm always staggered why people don't run the sort of case that probably can succeed in the Fair Work Commission, because all of them have failed so far. But if somebody brought a case where a man and a woman were doing essentially the same job or a comparable job and were being paid differently for no good reason, that would be remedied, I think, in a heartbeat.
Yes.
But for some reason, nobody's brought that case. They're talking about strengthening the Commission's powers in this area. I think we'll just have to wait and see what strengthening means. It might simply mean making it easier to make a claim, but we'll just have to wait and see. At the moment, run properly, equal pay cases could very easily succeed, but for some reason the union movement hasn't wanted to run them at that level. They've wanted to run these sort of grand cases across industry, and so far the Commission has knocked them all back. But yeah, I think the big takeaway is, look, if you do have issues around pay equity inside your business, you do have men and women performing work that is essentially the same and they're being paid differently. I would say challenge yourself now as to why, and if there's no good reason, sort it out. Absolutely.
It's a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer.
Yep.
Yeah. Casual employment. Gosh, we've just gone through this terrible world of who is a casual, who isn't a casual. We sat.
We fixed this.
We fixed. I know we fixed this. We sat. Everybody in our world knows what risotto means. The High Court case, and we're currently living in this lovely world where deciding who a casual is. It's all about how your contract's struck, and so we've been helping clients recently rewrite contracts and sort all that out. And am I wrong to say the Labor Party just want to roll all that back?
They do not like the contract being king.
No.
The High Court seems to want the contract to be king, and ultimately the Labor Party, I think, wants to introduce what they would call a more objective test that would call into question the status of 15A in the Fair Work Act, firm invest commitment of ongoing work according to a regular pattern. It would be more about the vibe of the employment. It could change. It might not necessarily.
Well, I started as a casual. I'm no longer a casual. I didn't start as a casual. I am a casual.
Absolutely. So I certainly think we are moving to a world of less certainty. On this point. But the second dot point there, want casuals to be truly irregular employees. Everyone knows who has looked at this space that there are a range of casual employment methods. The days of a casual employee maybe rock up one day, maybe doesn't. That's not really how it plays out in a lot of industries. And so we'll have to see what happens.
And look, I've said to everybody now for several years about this, if you've built a labour model around casual employment, have a very good look at whether or not that's the optimum labour model, because I think the way the Labor government will probably go with this, and I think they'll succeed with some of this, not all of it, but some of it. If you've built a labour model around casual employment, I'm not sure it's going to sustain itself unless you are in a truly irregular labour model world, such as my local coffee shop.
Yep.
So just have a good hard think about that. But yeah, I think there's going to be some rollback here on what we've achieved in the High Court very recently and through legislative change. The gig economy, I think we'll be reasonably prompt on this. There's no doubt that the Labor Party, in some way, some form, want to bring these platform providers into the mainstream world. The new Minister for Industrial Relations, Tony Burke, has promised the TW at their annual conference, I think on 12 May, Tony Burke said, don't worry, the Fair Work Commission will have the power to register agreements with these people. It'll have the power to settle disputes. So we're going to see the Labor government finally moving to try and create some regulation, some minimum standards for these people operating on platforms. The bit we don't understand at the moment is whether or not the gig economy conversation will extend into the world of people like owner-drivers.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, the fact that we've moved from a binary decision for, well, this is an employee and this is a contractor, and if you're, we need to get more contractors into the employee and these are all shares. We're not actually talking about that. No one's talking about that anymore. We're talking about employee-like forms of work. The Uberization of certain industries, it will be a genuine, or the proposal is, it'll be a genuine third way. How you straddle those two worlds will be the million-dollar question.
Yeah, and we've got several clients who operate with platforms at the moment, and we're talking to them at the moment about really understanding the mathematics of if certain minimum standards do start to apply to them, how is that going to impact their model today, and how's that going to impact their business model, their margins, and the actual feasibility of their operations. The TW are running around saying the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal's coming back. I would probably say to most of our clients, and we've got a lot of clients who are interested in this space, stay close to us, we'll keep you involved in that conversation. I don't think the RSRT will be coming back, but I would not be surprised if there is going to be some regulation of contract owner drivers. Obviously, we've got regulation in New South Wales, we've got regulation in Victoria, we've got regulation in Western Australia. They're all very different models of regulation, but I will not be surprised if there isn't some regulation there. They'll get the Greens over the line on that.
Yep.
And I suspect that the Liberal Party will be caught between a rock and a hard place on some of that as well, because of some of their constituency. So there's going to be a lot happening here, and I think they will get most of this over the line in some form or fashion. They seem to be very antagonistic to labour hire.
Yes.
Which always frustrates our labour hire clients quite a lot. And the big issue here is, and there's a phrase which I always get wrong, it's about how you pay them and pay the same.
Same pay.
Same work, same pay. A phrase coined by the ACTU very recently. Effectively, the gist of it's going to be this. They want to bring laws in so that if you employ labour hire people, engage labour hire people, they get paid the same money as you pay your own people working alongside. And I think the big takeaway here is if you're running a business that relies very heavily on cheaper labour hire, that's probably going to be something that's going to go. And so I think you need to be looking long and hard about that.
I mean, often the context, at least the context that's raised, is you have a very expensive EA and you are utilising labour hire to avoid the large expense of that EA. So it's going to be a very big issue for some employers and less of an issue for others.
For others, some employers already do match their labour hire rates with their internal rates, particularly in certain heavily unionised industries. Some people do it culturally. But I also think that you need to be looking at the business benefit of labour hire. It might also impact the actual cost of the labour hire, because most labour hire companies are putting their margin on the cost of labour.
Yes.
So the actual the percentage margin might not change, but the full cost might actually change quite dramatically. So I think there's going to be movement in this space. I think there really will be. I think this is a dead cert.
Yes.
Can you still use the phrase "lay down misere"? I don't know if people play cards anymore. This is a lay down misere. The government desperately want to stop people having enduring rolling fixed-term contracts. They want to put a limit on the period of time people can be on fixed-term contracts of 24 months. Now, this will be interesting because you get a lot of CEOs employed on 5-year contracts or 3-year contracts. Whether or not this is going to be aimed at the award world or workers at large in Australia, we'll have to wait and see. I suspect this is going to impacts some industries more than others, because some industries are heavily reliant on this type of concept. If you think about some of our clients who are private schools, a lot of people on fixed-term contracts, education sector.
Colleges where you don't quite know whether you're going to offer the subject again, you don't know how many students are going to enrol. There's good reasons for why you would have these ongoing contracts, and some of them can bank up. It's your insight, the blue box. But we would say this well before the Labor Party got elected. You got to challenge why you're using them and whether they're actually providing protection, because it is certainly not unknown that, notwithstanding that you have there is an end term, an end point on your contract, if the tribunal or a court looks at it and said, hang on, this has been going on forever, are they really providing you protection? And so it's, again, something to look at. It'll make things quite clear if there is a cap.
Yeah, and we're going to have this famous argument, and Lewis Itso would be very unhappy if we didn't say it, this whole debate between what's a fixed-term contract and a maximum-term contract. But there's no doubt there's going to be some constraint placed here. It'll get through the Parliament if the ALP want to run it. I think it'll get through. So for those people in those industries, I think it's a good time to have a chat about whether or not the current model is the one to use going forward.
We'll be talking about government contracts in some of the other points as well, but again, sectors that align employment contracts to government contracts, we need the funding, because we can't employ you after the funding runs out. We'll be talking about the new vibe, the new trend in terms of the way government is going to do.
Well, and it's interesting that at the moment, the way the LP policy talks, we're not sure whether or not it's going to be contracts that are for a specific task or a specific period. So again, possibly devil's in the detail, but get ready, there's going to be something playing in this space. I think that's going to happen. And so to sort of make all of that more meaningful, they're going to change the objectives in the Fair Work Act, which for most of our clients out there probably like ho-hum. But there's going to be this wonderful objective placed in the Fair Work Act about secure employment. I honestly don't know what that means at the moment, whether or not it's going to simply bolster other changes that go in the Act, we'll have to wait and see, or whether or not the Commission is going to be given some imprimatur to create some primacy in how it models awards and creates modern awards around that. We'll have to wait and see as well. I think the great challenge for most businesses when we talk to them right now is they want to talk about agility, responsiveness in labour models. ALP seem to be talking about a static, rigid world, and I'm going to be a bit punchy and say they seem to think the world is like it was in the 1950s. Probably not the way the world should be in the 2020s and 2030s. But so there's going to be an interesting challenge for business here when you actually add all of these little things up: casual, fixed term, changes to the Act. It's the cumulative effect, I think, that we're going to be talking to a lot of our clients about.
Absolutely right, and you're right. Changing the objective of the Fair Work Act might not have any direct effect that you can point to, but it's that cumulative effect, and this will be meaningful in terms of the decisions the Commission makes in terms of what goes into modern awards when the award variation thing happens, what might go into EAs. It's also possible if a dispute is brought about the way a particular enterprise agreement is.
This will colour the way the disputes.
Yeah. And it's a decent submission. If secure work is an objective of the Act, well, Commissioner, respectfully, that you have an obligation to ensure the security of work, and that's why you should accept our argument. So it's very interesting, and it is the sort of the flag of the new direction that will be taken.
And one of the great ironies, of course, which you and I do appreciate, because you and I ran the casual and part-time test case, 5 years ago now, 6 years ago now?
7.
7? Is it that long? Gosh, time does fly. Casual employment's, the actual volume of casual employment in this country has been static for a great many years, even though every time you see somebody go on TV, they say casual employment's going through the roof. The actual data doesn't support that at all. It's quite an interesting issue.
There are people who want to be casual as well.
As that decision found.
I thought that's why you raised it.
That decision found, including my son who's a university student. He wouldn't think of anything else. There's going to be movement on wage theft. It's a term I hate. I know you and I philosophically debated this term. It bothers me a lot.
Whatever that philosophical debate, it is lost.
It is lost,
This is
I
a
know.
term now, and it will be law.
It will be law. And look, the big issue here is going to be very simple, and that is the law going to be about somebody accidentally underpaying or getting paying wrong, or is the law going to be about deliberately not paying somebody correctly? And you get into a legal debate about mistake of fact or mistake of law, but it's really going to be more about that accident versus deliberate. I suspect there's going to be a long, heavy lobbying around getting that definition in a form that people are probably comfortable with. Frankly, if it is deliberate underpayment, good luck. You
Yep.
probably deserve what you get. My great worry is that the definition might be broad enough, and modern awards are complex, enterprise agreements are complex, and people get things wrong from time to time, even though they're trying their very best to get them right.
People also disagree on the interpretation or what the deal was. I don't know. In some ways, I think if we did get a legislated definition of wage theft, at least it would solve the language debate.
It draws the line.
It draws the line, and it's a term of increasing popularity and usage. It will be interested to see where the line is drawn, and the insight there. I mean, this is not news to anyone. You need to be cleaning your house. You need to be complying with whatever industrial agreement is applying to you, because even if you don't fall within the scope of wage theft, however that is defined, you've got a problem.
And if you think about where a lot of people came unstuck in the last 2 or 3 years, it was around aggregated salaries. And there is still this misconception out there that the minute I say I'm paying you an annual salary, the modern award doesn't apply.
Fill your boots, work for as long as you want. Doesn't work like that.
Doesn't work that way. So if you are annualising salaries for people otherwise covered by modern awards, please give us a call, because we'll first of all work out whether or not you've done it legally in a sensible way, and secondly we can talk to you about whether or not you got your maths right.
Yep.
But yeah, clean your house early rather than late. And I suspect there's going to be some pressure on that legal issue of accessorial liability, particularly around HR people and payroll people, if they are knowingly involved in or recklessly involved in underpayments. So just be mindful. This is coming. London to a brick. This is coming. Absolutely.
Now I don't know what that phrase.
Oh well, okay. Now I'm showing my age and probably where I came from, but this is definitely coming. There's no doubt about it. We
Yes.
agree? Yeah, we're agreed.
Yes.
It's coming. Portable leave. There are some portable leave schemes in the country today. You've dealt with these. You dealt with one last year about whether or not somebody was covered by one, if I remember rightly.
That's right, which is interesting, and we might get to that point as we look through. These schemes are around. I'm hoping that if they apply to you, you're aware of them, because sometimes ignorance is not bliss in this space. But this is a Labor Party thing. It is an idea whereby in industries where there are considerable degrees of movements between employers, that you wouldn't get the leave paid to you by your employer. How would you do it? You would get it paid into a bank.
And the fund's going to then give me
Yes.
the value of the leave. So this could be most of the schemes at the moment are long service leave schemes.
Yep.
But this could be long service leave, it could be annual leave. And the interesting one is it could be sick leave.
Yep.
It could be sick leave. Raises all sorts of questions about who it applies to, but is it going to apply industry by industry? It raises questions about, well, are casuals involved or not involved? What's going to happen to the casual loading? So there's quite a bit of detail in this. I think there's a commercial impact, which might be good and bad. At the moment, if you take annual leave and long service leave, assuming you're not covered by one of the existing schemes, you would obviously be putting a provision in for those things in your balance sheet. From year to year, if those people aren't taking those leaves when they finally take them, it's obviously of a higher value because you're paying them out at the new wages rather than the old wages. So there might be some actual balance sheet upside. Once you've paid into the fund, it's all over. You've washed your hands of it. But certainly for things like sick leave, you don't accrue for sick leave at the moment. It's a cash cost at the time. If you had to start paying into a fund to cover 10 days of sick leave for every one of your employees, that's a drain from your business you currently don't actually spend. If your employees are actually taking 4.5 days a year. So there's going to be some interesting commercial ramifications if this does or doesn't apply.
That's right. And the other thing is, depending on what industries it's introduced into, if you're sort of adjacent to that industry, you have a very important question to answer as to whether you should be paying into the fund or whether you're not subject to the rules of the fund. So that can be the existing schemes now. That can be a very important question to get right, because sometimes years can go by and then the regulator knocks on the door and says, well, no one's been paying into the fund, and you say, I didn't think we needed to. You need to get that right. So.
And as our experience is if these funds are for a defined industry, the people covering that fund are always want to try and creep that industry a little wider and a little wider.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Well, that's their job, I suppose. That's their job. Look, I'm not going to get too carried away about this. This will be an interesting one. The ALP have said that they're going to translate all of these things around secure employment into how they procure government services. Well, we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. I honestly don't know what it is. But if you are a business that's heavily reliant on federal government contracts, you are a principal supplier to the federal government, or you do work for them under contract, you probably have very heavy quality assurance requirements at the moment. I suspect the answer is they might, going forward, say something like, if you want this contract, you must demonstrate that you have no more than 10% of your employees as casuals, or you have no more than 5% of your employees as labour hire. So for those people who are in this sort of federal government contract procurement world, you want to keep your ear close to the ground for this, because there's probably going to be new rules around government contracts and procurement going forward. And they all spin around this notion of secure employment, secure jobs. So really, this is something to stay tuned, to be listening for, but I don't have the answers today. And I suspect this is one of those things that will just fly under the radar and happen.
It sounds good. It does sound really good. And if you did come to government on a policy platform that said...
You'd have to live it, haven't you?
You'd have to live it, and you'd want the people who you're getting services from to live it as well. You'd want them on the bus or the boat or whatever it is.
In the same vein, the government said they're going to be a model employer.
Exactly.
And I've not been too rude, but my answer is good luck. It'll be interesting to see. Apparently they're going to do all of this in the public sector. So they're going to get rid of casuals, they're going to get rid of labour hire, they're going to promote full-time and permanent employment and do all these interesting things. And I suppose, look, maybe it is a bit facetious to say good luck, but...
Nigel's words, not mine.
My words, not yours.
I think it's probably fair enough. I mean, it is saying these things are good, we're going to do them as well. I think that's fair enough. I think it is hard.
It's a lot harder in practice.
Yeah, and sincerely, I mean, I do wish them luck.
I do wish them luck too.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not it makes federal public sector more efficient or more cost effective, obviously we'll have to wait and see. It might not. And obviously if it doesn't, then will obviously be a bigger issue in terms of the tax take, because the federal government is one of Australia's largest employers.
Yes.
So we'll just have to watch that space. But yes, they've actually said we're going to live what we say. And that's what they've done, and at least you have to commend them for saying we're going to live what we say, because not everybody does. For some, this is a great fear. They're going to abolish the Australian Building and Construction Commission. They're also going to abolish the Registered Organisations Commission.
The ROC.
The ROC. I'll deal with them in reverse order if we can. Look, abolishing the ABCC, reintroducing the ABCC, abolishing it, reintroducing it. It's the great industrial yo-yo. I'm sorry to say that, but it is. Every time we have a change in government, if it's a blue government, we're going to have the ABCC and give it more power. If it's not a blue government, we're going to get rid of it or weaken its powers. It's really a construction industry issue. And for those of our clients who are in the construction industry, I imagine they are currently fearful that the ABCC will be going. The bottom line is that whether or not you think it's been really good at its job or not, it has managed to curb some of the excess behaviour that we've traditionally seen, particularly from the CFMEU, but for unions in the building industry, and particularly from that union in Melbourne and probably Perth, more recently Brisbane, probably less in Sydney. Probably haven't seen that type of behaviour. So what does that mean for the building industry? It means it's probably back to the old days, a much stronger union, even though in some places it already is a very strong union, strategically strong in terms of how it operates. And it probably means in those sectors we're going to see increased industrialisation of issues, and we're probably going to see increased cost. And at a time where probably the construction industry could do with having less cost, we're probably going to see more cost. The ROC things, that's a nerdy thing, I think. I'm going to say it's a nerdy thing. For those clients of ours who are registered organisations, they've always been regulated by somebody. They used to be regulated by the Fair Work Commission, they're now regulated by the ROC. I'm not going to sweat this one. For me, this is just about, well, what are the corporate governance rules that registered bodies should follow? I've always said, well, why don't they just follow the same rules as the corporation? But it would seem to be a sensible way. I don't think that's going to be a big issue. I don't see lawlessness breaking out because the ROC disappears.
There's going to be rules,
yeah,
and someone's going to look at whether they're going to people are following the rules. I assume it's going to be the Fair Work Commission.
My view is it'll be the Fair Work Commission, and those rules will apply both to registered unions for employees and registered employer bodies as well. They'll apply like.
Yep.
So I think it's the ABCC that's the issue. It's not the ROC. But I do think this will happen.
What about, will the Liberal Party bring it back if they ever get back into power?
My view is that if the Liberal, it's very nicely put, my view is if the Liberal Party won the next election, they'd bring the ABCC back in a heartbeat.
I actually read yo-yo as YOLO.
Did you? No, it was meant to be yo-yo. It's that old-fashioned thing goes up and down. It's all right. It's okay. Now look, shock horror. If you actually talked to us about 3 months ago about what the union movement was after, and you read through that list, what do you find? Almost everything on that list is in the ALP policy. You know, to be fair, the union movement has a very strong role to play still in the ALP, and there's no doubt that there is complete alignment on most of the big ticket issues between the ALP and the union movement, and the union movement will be playing a key role in helping to lobby and agitate for those things to become law. So that's what we're going to be seeing in the public domain over the next 6 to 12 months.
Fair enough. And again, it has been a relatively long time since the Labor government, but this is, for the old hands, this is not news.
We're not surprised.
It's not news.
We're not surprised. The one thing that some people do get surprised with, they go, well, hang on a minute, didn't the Labor government write the Fair Work Act? And the answer is they did. And frankly, if you talk to senior figures in the union movement, I'm not sure they were ever in love with the Fair Work Act. The pejorative phrase that some of my friends in the union movement always used was, it's work choices light.
Right.
So don't be shocked that even though the Labor Party wrote the Fair Work Act, the union movement wants to change it. And I think our general proposition is there's going to be change, and I think it's going to be fairly sizable. And we need to be ready for that in terms of our psychology and our approach. Some questions. Now, we've got a little bit of time left. We might just see if we can go. You've got quite a few coming through, but the first one is about the building and construction industry post-election. I think I've dealt with that. I think we will see a bit of a return to what I might describe as some of the industrially excessive behaviour of some unions if the ABCC goes. I think there will be some people who will be making decisions about whether or not they operate their businesses in certain markets. We've had some clients who've left the Melbourne market completely and now operate in different parts of Australia in terms of their markets. But there's no doubt that it'll be a kind of return to the old days in the building industry in some parts.
Your answer is based on the industrial relations changes we're talking about. You're not talking about the economy.
No.
So obviously overlaid on all of these answers,
is the economy.
Predicting the future, which is always challenging. We're talking about in the context of the Labor Party changing regulation. What will happen with the economy?
Well, we had a good chat in the taxi on the way over, and you got depressed by what I said. But
keep questions moving.
Going. New pay rates. Look, at this stage, I know that the Labor the new Prime Minister has been running around going, give everybody 5.1%, give everybody 5.1%. The annual wage review bench is sitting at the moment, the expert panel. That decision, I always get this wrong, it's about 16th of June, around that, so it's around the middle of this month. For me, that's the watershed moment. So at the moment, the expert panel is continuing. It'll hand down its annual wage review decision. It'll be operative from the 1st of July.
Correct.
We'll have to wait and see what the expert panel hands down. I think it'll have a 3 on it. I suspect there's some people who think it might have a 2 on it. I'm going to put my neck on the line and say it ain't going to have a 5 on it, because I think we've got an expert panel that understand that if you just continually pump wages aligned to CPI, you're doing nothing other than putting further pressure on inflation. And guess what? For those of us who are old enough in the room to remember, in the 1970s, we broke away from CPI-based wage increases and we moved to productivity-based wage increases because we were in a wage price inflation spiral, which was destroying the economy. So I don't think the expert panel will be handing down a 5.1% wage increase. I could be wrong.
I'm not going to give a prediction.
You're not going to give a prediction?
Keep mine for the office sweep,
which you normally seem to win anyway. So
tend to win this year, so I'm not giving anyone any clues on that.
Recent High Court decisions. Well, look, there's probably 2 that are important, personnel contracting, and then I'm going to say it and get it wrong, because you can always correct me. We all call it JAMSEC, but it's...
A lot of people call it JAMSEC. I think it's JAMESC.
JAMESC, okay, thank you.
They're different because the change of government in relation to owner-drivers, which is JAMESC, is probably... I don't know if they're going to go in for...
Well, they won't change it. At the end of the day, TW believe in owner-drivers. TW have a very large part of its membership based in owner-drivers. They don't want people who buy $200,000 trucks and run little proprietary limited companies to be called employees, but they might like them to be regulated separately. That's a different issue.
Exactly. I think the movement is more around tilting this concept that, well, the contract is always king around independent contracting versus employees. I think if we see anything, we'll see something more around, well, is it the objective character?
And the one thing I would say is this, is if you've got lots of people in your business today who are sole traders with an ABN doing nothing other than providing their labour, pick the phone up and have a conversation now and don't wait, because that's the class of person who's going to fall over pretty quickly if the laws change.
Exactly. The borderline sham contract at the moment is the thing that might just tip it. It might just tip it.
And they're the ones that always worry me.
Yep. Oh, exactly. This is why we pick phones up.
That's exactly right.
To talk about those issues.
What could happen in the not-for-profit sector? That's a really good question. The ALP have promised to set up this kind of working group to look more closely at the not-for-profit sector. I suspect that there will be an element of that working group that's going to look at the question of labour and funding for not-for-profit. I think there is a question. There is a question about aged care. I suspect that the first cab off the rank there is going to be what's the Labor Party's position on the aged care work value case. We're running that case at the moment. We've just gone through the evidentiary phase of that case. I'm going to be very careful how I respond to it because it is before the full bench at the moment. Yeah. I just said, look, the Labor Party will file a submission. I'm going to say I don't think the Labor Party will file a submission saying what the increase, if any, should be. I think they'll probably file a submission saying that they believe that there should be an increase. I think they'll file a submission saying that the wages for aged care workers should be properly set. The $64,000 question is how in the world they might respond to the question of funding without being too cute. They've said they will fund. They've obviously walked into office and realised that the government's pretty well broke, having spent $2 trillion to get us through COVID. And this big issue in this sector about funding isn't will they fund today, it's will they fund next year, the year after, the year after that, the year after that. So for those people in the SHADS area, after the equal remuneration decision in 2011, 2012, there was funding for 3 years, and then all of a sudden it was, well, you're on your own. So there's some real challenges here. But the ALP, the Labor Party, the government, will no doubt file a submission in that case, and then we can talk to certainly our clients and about that in more detail. Oh, look, that's an interesting question. Is there going to be a push, bigger push now for workplaces around diversity, equity and inclusion? I think there will be some. I'm going to put aside what we might describe as the current sort of HR trend in this area, because there clearly is an HR trend in this area. I think there will be a bigger push. I think it'll be mostly around, probably the big issue to think about is this whole notion of gender pay equity.
Yep.
I get very anxious about this because it's kind of an aggregated number. It's what's the average weekly earnings of women versus men in your business. It doesn't take into account whether or not I'm comparing like-for-like jobs, but I suspect the government's going to impose more and more obligations on more and more businesses about reporting that. And I suspect that, again, if you come back to that notion of government contracts, government procurement, I think if you are in that space, they might want you to have certain results around that to be eligible to be in the government contract, government procurement space. So I think there will be some things there. Outside of that, though, I think we've covered off on the working with respect. Right. I think we have.
So the answer is yes.
Yes, and it's about degree and whether or not it impacts particular people more than others.
Yes.
The childcare industry. They've clearly indicated a policy for increased funding in childcare. Now, I always get this wrong, so I wrote this down. So Paul Mondo, who's the head of the childcare industry, normally watches, and he'll be very offended if I get it wrong. I think the election campaign commitment was to lift the maximum childcare subsidy rate to 90%, up from 83% for the first child in care for those with a total family income of up to $530,000 starting 1 July 2023. Paul, hopefully I got that right. I think I've got that right. The really interesting thing about that was the Grattan Institute came out and said that if you do that, you will make a sort of increase available labour into the labour market. I think sort of like 8% more work hours. And I think it actually equates to some dramatic number like 44,000 more jobs equivalent.
Right.
So it's about workforce participation. I don't see that flowing into. I think that's a broader policy issue around funding the sector. Probably again more around that support on the gender side, but also support on the workforce participation side. I don't think that's necessarily going to flow straight through to issues around childcare related wages. I think for those people in that industry, Jules, I think we're going to be sitting back and seeing whether or not eventually there is a work value case running for childcare employees generally. We obviously spent 6 or 7 years arguing about work value and equal remuneration in that industry. Those cases the employers succeeded in, but you do wonder whether or not one day that's going to come back again. So we'll just have to watch that space. But clearly the government has made a commitment to increase funding, but at this stage it's more about funding the family rather than funding the employer to pay higher wages, and I think we just need to keep our eye out for that. Oh gosh, what a terrible question to finish on. How will CPI change impact wage expectations? Shall I try it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try it. Number one, I'm going to say a number of things. I've already talked about the fact that we've got to be, at a macro level, we're going to have to be very sensitive, because if we just start funding wages based on CPI, we're just going to be in an inflation spiral, and so we're going to have to be very careful with that. At the moment, when we're involved in bargaining, I'm talking to a lot of our clients. I was with certain clients yesterday having this conversation. You've got to remember there's been a lot of real wage growth in the low inflation environment since the GFC. So people have done quite well in the last 10 to 15 years. I think people need to be very careful about making commitments to CPI. I won't be shocked if the next CPI figure has a 7 or 8 on it. This will be a temporary phenomena because if we don't get this under control, frankly, the Australian economy will fall into recession anyway. So I think it's a temporary issue. The one thing I will say is there's no doubt that wage expectations are on the increase. I don't think anybody legitimately at the moment thinks they're about to get a 5 or 8% wage increase. I don't see that when I'm talking to clients who are dealing with bargaining at the moment. But the wage expectations that were 2 a year ago are certainly now 3 this year, and they're probably going up. We probably won't see the real impact of that until later this year. And as I said right at the beginning of the conversation around the wage panel, I think the annual wage review percentage increase is going to be a watershed moment, because that might create expectations, because that bench is going to be looking at inflation very carefully.
It is. This is an issue that's in the media a lot at the moment. There are instructionals on news sites about how and why you should ask your boss for a pay raise. Talk about it later, Nigel. But I think you're right. The annual wage review decision really is the watershed moment, because that will set the tone. Absolutely. So.
Because they're going to talk about inflation, they're going to talk about the fact it is 5.1, they're going to talk about the government submission. So I without wishing to put pressure on the expert panel and Justice Ross, all eyes will be on them over the next 2 weeks. And obviously stay tuned, we'll let you know how that goes. I think that's probably all we've got time for today. Can I say deep apologies for those people who did suffer some technical problem. We've carried on, and we will be sending the recording to you.
It's on YouTube anyway.
It's on YouTube anyway.
For everyone who suffered the absence, thank you for staying with us. We appreciate it.
And I would say that we'll keep you posted, obviously, as what is currently policy might move into draft legislation. We'll keep everybody up to date. But at this stage, if you are wanting to really project forward and start to think about some of these things, please pick the phone up and give us a call, and we'll see how we can help you even at this early stage. Stay well. We'll be in touch very soon. Thanks, Jules. It was fun. I think we got through it.
It was.
And please have a great week and an enjoyable weekend. Take care.